Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to Great Ideas in Psychology, a series of videos inspired by Fatali Moughadam's book by the same title, Great Ideas in Psychology, A Cultural and Historical Introduction. We have reached chapter 6, which is titled Learning. So we are going to talk about why learning is central to psychology, why it is at the heart of psychology as a discipline, as an area of study. And we are also going to talk about a couple of major approaches to learning in psychology. Let's go to the slides and see what I have. Once again, this is our textbook by Fatali Moughadam, and my lecture or my presentation might deviate in some respect from the material in the textbook. But I try my best to include important material from the chapter. The medium of the video presentation is different from the medium of the text. So there are going to be some discrepancies, inevitably. I try my best. This is where we are in the general plan of the course or the series. This is our second lecture concerned with learning. In the previous video, we talked about long-term potentiation, which is related to the study of learning and plasticity at the neural level, at the level of cells and connection among cells. Now we are going to talk about learning at the level of organism. The author invites us to imagine, as we are starting to think about learning, he invites us to imagine a child who is playing with a ball. So there's a boy, maybe he's around 4, 5, 6 years old, and he's playing with the ball, he's bouncing the ball against the ground, against maybe a wall, and getting more and more exposure with the physical space, the physical properties of the ball, the ground, and what the boy's own body is capable of. The more the boy plays, the better he becomes. If he plays with other people, it becomes more effective in playing whatever game he is playing. And so this is, the author brings in as one example of experience. It is play, but it is also kind of play that can cause or enable lasting changes in the boy's behavior. The other example is a teenager, maybe a teenage girl who's talking on the phone. At the same time, she's doing two things. She's talking to her friend about homework that they're completing that evening. And every once in a while, she interrupts the talk about the homework and she talks about their social life in high school. So talking a little bit about the friends, what is happening in the friends, in the social life, and then interrupting that and going back to the homework and back and forth. And the author points out that this kind of episode, this kind of experience also involves learning both about the homework, about the material related to the homework, and a kind of dynamic interaction, exchange about the high school social life and social life in general. And it can, as a result, also result lasting changes in behavior. So this is already a wide range of examples, two examples, but they cover a wide range of types of experience and behavior that are under the umbrella of learning. Learning is a central question in psychology because this question is about the plasticity of behavior and about the extent to which behavior can be altered through learning. This is a quote from page 76 of this chapter. There are more examples that we can go through to highlight the relevance of learning and learning-related topics in our lives. So a parent might wonder, how much of my child's behavior and decisions can I influence by giving the child advice? So I give advice to my child, to my son or daughter, and the advice seems ineffective. So I keep giving advice. So some parents get stuck in that mode of giving advice, seeing the advice not working, and they continue giving advice and thinking somehow they believe, maybe not so rationally, they believe that if they give that advice, if they repeat the advice enough times, it's going to work. So that seems like it implies a theory of learning that is ineffective. But the concern with learning is present. A teenager might wonder, how much of my girlfriend or my boyfriend's behavior and habits can I change or will change if my romantic interest or my romantic partner, if they have a bad habit, a habit that I don't like, a behavior that I don't like, Can I stay in the relationship and hope that that behavior will change eventually? And what is the best way to help behavioral change in another person, if it is possible at all? We can think about mundane examples in this general topic, like the choice of vanilla and chocolate. Being able to know someone enough to know what they are going to do based on what they have learned about life, from their previous decisions. When they're given the choice of, let's say, vanilla and chocolate, which are they going to choose? But of course, there are more pressing, more concerning, more relevant, deeply relevant issues that we are concerned about, we are curious about. Like, let's say in a romantic partnership, in a romantic relationship, one of the partners refuses to talk whenever they are upset. And we want to understand this, and we want to see if we can facilitate the change from this shutting down, not talking, the refusal to talk whenever this person is upset, they just refuse to talk. Can we move a little bit away from that and begin communication and show to the person, or let the person know that they can communicate even when they're upset? Now we get to a point where we can talk about fundamentally different approaches to thinking about learning. They all have their roots in psychology, in history of psychology. One of them is, we can say it is an introspectionist approach to learning. We want to first establish what caused a person, or what was the learning experience or set of experiences that led the person to learn something, to adopt a behavior, adopt a habit. And to understand them, we ask about their history and we ask about their preferences. We can say, why did you choose vanilla, for example? Or why do you stop talking when you're upset? And we listen to their responses, and we try to think about their responses and see what we can understand about their history of learning. And as a result, whether we can do something to change their behavior and make the behavior more adaptive. Another approach we can refer to as behavioristic approach, or the approach of behaviorism. This approach isn't interested in talking to people. It is instead interested in only investigating the behavior. Look at the actions. Actions speak louder than words. The behavior enables us, or attention to behavior gives us an objective method, and method that others can also use and verify. And it enables us prediction and control, this general approach of behaviorism. It is not about talking to people in an open-ended way and relying on their introspection, because somebody might do something later on that contradicts what they said during an introspective interview. In addition to those advantages, behaviorism has another advantage. It can be applied to humans and non-human animals equally. So when B.F. Skinner, for example, studied pigeons, or when he studied rats, his findings arguably were not just about those pigeons. What he wanted to understand was discovering general laws of behavior, general laws of learning, general regularities, laws that we can apply not just to pigeons, but they were interesting. His findings were interesting precisely because they could be extended to, at least he could make a case that they can be extended to the study of human beings as well. There's a Chinese psychologist who also followed on the path of behavioristic psychology. His name is Zheng Kuo, and he studied cats. His studies are quite interesting because he discovered that you can teach cats to be friendly with mice. So you can train cats to be friendly, or to have animosity towards the same animals, rats or mice. B.F. Skinner argued that behaviorism has an additional advantage of being, or relying on very similar principles as Darwin's theory of natural selection. He has this paper in particular. The paper's title is Selection by Consequence. And in that paper, he has another version of this paper, a bit longer. This is published in Science, the journal Science. The other longer, more extensive version of it, with commentary by other authors, was published in the journal Behavior and Brain Sciences. And in these two articles, he argues that just like how organisms and survive based on the consequence of their fit with their environment. A similar principle applies in selection of behavior. So an action that results in reward is selected, and it continues within the lifetime of one single organism. The theory of selection by natural evolution by natural selection applies to the life of a species across multiple generations. It is also about selection, and it is also about the consequence of what happens if a certain thing is selected. Here we have a principle that we can use to think about the lifetime and the behaviors that are shaped within the lifetime of an organism. So that paper, Selection by Consequence, is arguing the continuity of behaviorism in psychology, how that is continuous and consistent with the same principles, scientific principles of evolutionary theory. So B.F. Skinner was a serious thinker, and his papers are still worth reading. Another paper that I used to teach a lot in, I used to rely on in my cognitive psychology course. In one of the first few lectures, I liked to introduce Skinner's article, Why I'm Not a Cognitive Psychologist, because I found it really helpful to contrast Skinner's approach with cognitive psychology and just begin with a set of critical notes about the whole field of cognitive psychology. Some people might disagree. There are some limitations, and at least to show students that it is possible to think differently about the same phenomena. So in this paper, Why I Am Not a Cognitive Psychologist, Skinner goes through a series of examples and argues throughout this paper that the variables that determine behavior, human behavior or animal behavior, the variables that determine behavior are external to the organism. They are in the environment. So unlike cognitive psychologists who are interested in studying the inner mechanisms, the inner functions of the mind, a psychologist should study the environments and the variables in the environment that determine behavior. So for example, we have the observation of Pavlov's dog, where the dog looks at or experiences the co-occurrence, so the co-occurrence of the food with the sound of a bell. And after a while, these two things are associated with each other because they co-occurred. They occurred together at the same time. And as a result, it's enough to just hear the sound of the bell for the dog to salivate, because that is associated with the food. So somebody who is aligned with cognitive psychology and mental representation will say that in the dog's mind, these two, the food and the bell, the sound of the bell, are associated with each other. That's what the dog has learned. The dog has learned this mental association. So cognitive or introspectionist psychology will talk about the associated, these two elements being associated in the dog's mind, in the dog's psyche. Skinner said, the association is not in the mind. Pavlov made the association. Pavlov made the bell connected or a predictor of food. So the dog learned something about the external environment. The dog picked up on something, picked up on an association. We don't need to refer to the content of the mind of the dog. And then Skinner also talks about other examples, including the lemon. He says, when you look at a lemon, when you look at an image of a lemon or an actual lemon in the grocery store, you can just look at that, look at the lemon, the color of the lemon, the shape of the lemon, and you can remember the taste. You can imagine the sour taste of the lemon. You can taste or imagine this taste of the lemon juice. And if you taste the lemon juice, like, conversely, you can taste the lemon juice, taste of the lemon. You can imagine the visual features of a lemon. Again, we are contrasting two approaches in cognitive or introspectionist psychology. I'd say that in your mind, the image of lemon is associated with the taste of the lemon. But Skinner would say the two are associated in the world. Your mind learns and picks up this association and then expects one when seeing or tasting the other. We can extend this way of thinking into the language too, into our languages as well. So word associations, you think about the word house and other words will come to mind, like home, furniture. You think about or you hear the word hospital And other words will come to your minds, like recovery, nurse, doctor, emergency room. Again, cognitive psychologists or introspectionist psychologists might say, in your mind, these words are associated in a network of concepts, interconnected concepts. And Skinner again will say the words are associated in the world, in books, in conversations. We have learned to expect the sets of concepts as being in each other's vicinity, in neighborhood of each other. So then Skinner takes that next step that I think really is worth thinking about. He says that even if mental associations are really there, we don't need them. We do not need them to explain anything. Because a psychologist, Skinner argues, psychologist is interested in predicting and controlling behavior. And in order to do that, all you need to know is the world of the organism, the associations that the organism has picked up on, has learned. You don't need to then refer to the inner world or the inner mind, the psyche of the organism. All you need to know is the world to which the organism was exposed and the world that the organism learned about. So in the case of this example that we talked about before, there's a romantic partner or a person in a romantic relationship who becomes quiet every time they feel upset. To understand why he doesn't talk whenever he is upset, we need to understand his world, quote unquote, his world. What he has learned to expect, the regularities that he has been exposed to. And of course, by not talking, he is not challenging those regularities, is preventing himself from acquiring any new experience that would challenge what he has already learned, he would challenge his world. So he's kind of, in that sense, stuck with the result of his previous learning. This is the position of the behaviorist. You have to learn about the world of this person to know why they shut down and they don't communicate when they're upset. For behaviorists, the world of the person is interchangeable, it's exchangeable with the term or the phrase history of reinforcement, the things that were reinforced or the things that were punished, the history of the feedback that this organism, the person or the animal, has received so far from the environment. And this includes the way a person or an animal is paying attention to the environment. This world or the history of reinforcement shape not just the concrete actions like, oh, press this button, not press this button, talk when you feel upset or don't talk when you feel upset. This learning includes in it how we produce abstractions, how we come up with abstract ideas and the way we abstract based on the material of our experience. So we have abstraction. For example, in these three shapes, these three figures that I'm going to show you, we can say that they are all the same. They have the same feature of being the same shape, square, despite the fact that their sizes are different and the colors are different. So we are abstracting when we are talking about the similarity between these three shapes. This is already showing that we are capable of abstracting. Similarly, when you are saying that these four shapes have all the same feature, there's one feature that they all share in common. Again, we are applying abstraction, mental abstraction, abstracting a feature. Here it is, the color. Skinner very interestingly showed that pigeons are capable of this kind of abstraction, at least their behavior showing that they can focus on color. So a pigeon can be trained to just respond to the color and ignore shape. The promise of behaviorism is really grand. Behaviorism promises, as it is exemplified in B.F. Skinner's book, Walden 2, behaviorism promises social reform, not just psychological reform, but at a grand scale, it says that we can reduce societal problems like crime, unemployment, and we can solve these problems by modifying the world in which people find themselves, giving them the right kind of reinforcement, the right environment that gives them the right reinforcements. For psychologists who are interested in learning, understanding, behaviorism promises laws of learning. And according to behaviorists, psychology couldn't be a science without laws. This was an argument used by B.F. Skinner and his followers and associates and already by John B. Watson, the first American behaviorist. Of course, it all began with classical conditioning, Ivan Pavlov, and another way of formulating these associations and learned association was formulated by Thorndike in terms of the law of effect, which is quite similar to Skinner's operant conditioning. Before getting further, I really want to share this passage with you from our textbook about the history of behaviorism, its origin in Russia, and how it was supported by the political environment and climate. Let's read this passage together. Pavlov's materialist approach was in important ways in harmony with the Marxist-Leninist ideology that dominated the communist state, particularly from the 1930s to the 1950s, a period that coincided with the heyday of behaviorism in North America and Western Europe. Marxist-Leninism gave primacy to material conditions, seeing experiences of consciousness as arising from material characteristics of individuals and society. It is ironic that Pavlov's research formed a foundation for behaviorism, and that behaviorism developed as a uniquely American school of psychology. Thus, the world centers of communism and capitalism, Soviet Russia and the United States, both at one time endorsed behaviorism, but for very different reasons. The previous passage talking about the support given to Ivan Pavlov and the at least superficial consistency or congruency between Pavlov's psychology or Pavlov's science. Pavlov himself distanced himself from what we would identify as psychology. There's another really important psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, who lived around the same time and did not only he didn't receive the same level of support, but he was actively repressed. And Vygotsky is somebody that we will talk about in a future video in this series, when we talk about development of individuals and stages of development and zone of proximal development. Let's get back to our current lecture. I want to note quickly the difference between classical conditioning and the law of effect. Is there a difference between the two? There is a subtle difference. In classical conditioning, we are usually interested in the association between stimuli. So you perceive two things together, and you realize that these two things are related to each other. And you can be a passive observer or a passive learner, relatively speaking, a passive organism, just detecting, picking up these associations. The law of effect ascribes a more active position to the organism. So let's go through these two again quickly. Classical conditioning describes learning the association between stimuli. Law of effect describes learning the association between action and outcome. For example, this action is associated with a reward. Now, there are qualifications, or if you want to be more critical, you can say there are shortcomings and points of criticism. You can start criticizing a strong version of behaviorism. And there are multiple ways you can begin this criticism. One of them is, one way to qualify or begin pointing out shortcomings of behaviorism is in terms of innate behaviors. So you can begin talking about innate behaviors. Some behaviors you can say are innate, like the behavior of imprinting. And yes, you can shape those innate behaviors and associate them with new stimuli, conditioned stimuli. But if the behavior is not innate, if the behavior is not available at all to the organism, then it is impossible to shape it and associate it with something else. Another point is to talk about innate cognitive abilities. And one of the most important representatives of this kind of argument, and one of the earliest in history of modern psychology, is cognitive maps. And this paper that I really like by Edward C. Tolman, the title of the paper is Cognitive Maps in Rats and Men. And Tolman showed that learning and changes in behavior is not about simple changes in what animals do. with their muscle movements. They learn to get reward from turning to the left, so they keep turning left, or pressing a button and pressing the button on the left side, for example, and they keep pressing that button because that is associated with the reward. What the animals learn is something that is more than that. It can be more than that. That is what the concept cognitive map is trying to capture. Let me show you a couple of examples of this. So Tolman is in that paper talking about experiments with mazes. So a rat learns to solve this maze, knows where to go, which way to turn in order to get to the end of the maze and receive the reward. After a while of experiencing with this structure of the maze is replaced with another version. So this is what you see here is the learning phase. In the learning phase, the animal is not just having access to the maze, to the structure of the maze, but can also look at the room, the broader context, the environment. Maybe there are pictures on the wall. There's a light somewhere. Maybe there's a cabinet on the left side of the space. So those landmarks are present and accessible. Later, in the test phase, Tolman replaced the original maze and blocked that first path. And the question here was, which one of these available paths, which are numbered from 1 to 18, which one of these paths the rats are more likely to take? If the rat has learned the general map of the room, they are going to take the path that takes them more or less directly towards the food, that point G in the left side graph, the map on the left side. So that would be maybe path number 6 or 5, maybe 5 or 6 or 7. But if the rat has not learned the general map, they've just learned a particular direction to run in, then they're not going to take that direct path. The findings support the cognitive map. So you see the path that is most likely, most frequently taken by the rats is path number 6, that directly going towards the food, which suggests that the rat doesn't just learn about directions of running. The rat learns about the general map of the room. Another experiment, which Tolman reports, involved changing the orientation, where the animal is placed in the room and which direction they're facing. So this is the way they began. So they start at the starting position at the top of this map. And for one group of the rats, the food is placed on the left side. For the second group of rats, the food is placed on the right side. In the test phase, so this is what they learn. They are then tested by being placed on the opposite direction. So now their orientation in the room is reversed. Now keep in mind, they have some impression of the general room, thanks to maybe the cabinets or pictures or the door, the place of the light. So when they are placed at the opposite location, the orientation is reversed. Are they now going to turn towards the food, towards the place that they have learned, or are they going to repeat the same pattern of movement? So if they have learned just to turn left, are they now going to turn left, or are they going to turn in the opposite direction, which is consistent with the broader map, general cognitive map? Again, the findings suggest the presence of cognitive map. The observation is that many, not all, of course, not all, but many of the rats show signs of having a global map that transferred from an old structure to a new structure, or from an old orientation to a new orientation. Towards the end of this essay, which I would really recommend you reading this essay by Tolman, because at the end, he speculates about the relevance of cognitive maps in humans, even though he doesn't really report anything. But the way he talks about the extension of cognitive maps in human psychology, it really shows how it can be connected to other thinkers like Sigmund Freud. So he says, for example, he uses the words regression and fixation. He says that when people regress, when they are stressed or challenged too much with the tasks of life, they might get stuck in an old and simple map. And in the case of the example that I referred to previously, the person might say, if I keep quiet, the problem will go away. That's why when the person gets upset, they just shut down and don't talk. That is an instance of regressing into a map that you've learned previously, which is not faithful to the present situation. In addition, fixation. Fixation, we can define it as getting stuck in a wrong map, a map that doesn't apply to the present situation. So if I keep, for example, the parent and the advice giving scenario, the parent thinks if I keep repeating my advice, the child will eventually listen to me. But of course, in many cases, this is the wrong map. It is not really reflective of how things work in the behavior of the child. Going back to the examples that I showed you in the very beginning of this video, we can talk about the boy with the ball in terms of the cognitive map, the map of the physical space, forces, movements, and the dynamic relationship between those. The child is learning about those. And in the case of the teenage girl, she is learning about the map of the social life as well as the map of the homework that she's completing. All right, this is the end of our presentation for this time. If you enjoy this series, if you like me to continue and not run out of steam, not run out of energy, you can reinforce and give me some reinforcements, changing the contingencies or contingencies of reinforcement in my environment by showing support, by liking and commenting. That would really mean a lot, because this is a long series, and if I don't have visible support, it would be difficult for me to continue and get to the end of the series. For more serious support, to get more access to more exclusive content on my Patreon, you can visit that page. There are also reading groups and writing groups that I hold almost every week. And finally, our next topic, which we will get to next Tuesday, is the topic of intelligence tests or IQ tests. That's it for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and we will pick up the discussion next time.